Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Adventure Box podcast. This is Zach Edwards with Historical Conquest, and I've got a lot to say today. This is a topic that is like the most diverse. Not diverse also, but it's a topic that can rile even the least excitable person. This is a topic that if we went in certain ways, everyone should be up at arms. And this is the topic of slavery. So this is week 6 of the Adventure Box podcast curriculum. And you can read about slaves and slavery throughout the global history in this next article or this next section. So what's important to know about slavery is that it is not an American thing. It is not a South American thing. It's not a New World thing. It was going on for thousands of years before. Now, that does not give anyone the right to enslave others whatsoever, whether it's slave labor or other things that you use slaves for that we won't mention in this podcast. Slavery is never right. Forcing someone to do something outside of their interest is not a good thing. And that goes on well beyond slavery too. We have the freedom to choose. We have the freedom and the rights to do as we wish, as long as it does not influence or affect another. When it affects another, there are laws that help us to govern those actions. But at the same time, most things, you may not think it does, but most things actually influence the people around you. Which is why we have laws about certain things that are done that might influence someone that's not you. And I'm not going to go into all the topics. I would love to, but that's more political. We're talking about history. So in history, where did this all begin? Where did slavery begin? Okay, so let's go backwards. Okay, so right now we do have a slave trade that's still going on. It's black market, and it is people. It's happening in Brazil, it's happening in other countries, but it's also happening here. A lot of the immigrants that are actually that come over the border are being trafficked, but then even in the United States, they are being enslaved. I'm not talking about someone that's working for someone legitimately. I'm talking about kids that come over and disappear. We have all these different things. I've got a great group. It's called the Underground Railroad. This is an organization that fights basically the slave trade anywhere, and the abuse of children, and abuse of women, and the abuse of even men in these type of circumstances. We have a rapper right now that's going to jail for slave trade, a type of slave trade, and so he's going hopefully away for a long time. That is slavery, whether it's coerced, forced upon them, no matter what. That's wrong. So that's it. That's how much I'm going to say about our feelings, or how our feelings should be about slavery and any kind of other servitude in this day and age. Now, again, when you're looking at things, you have to look at it from the eyes of those that were back then. So I just learned about someone that I will talk to you about later on. His name is Alexander Donovan. An amazing man, helped out thousands, if not millions of people with his own honor and integrity. Now, interesting enough, his family owned slaves. When he grew up, he owned slaves. Now, can we say he's an evil person for owning slaves? No. We are looking from the eyes that we have right now. People in, say, South America, they have certain things that they do that we see as wrong. But can we condemn the people, or can we condemn the act? Okay, so that being said, yes, he had slaves, By the end of his life, by living his life and meeting so many great people, he actually learned that slavery was wrong, which he did not understand back when he first became an adult. And he was like, how does someone not understand that? Well, sorry, when you grow up in a civilization that basically teaches that, you'd be questioning it too. So many of the founding fathers fought against slavery. Did some of them have slavery? Yes, they or slaves? Yes, they did. Could they still fight against it even though they had slavery? Yes, they could. There's so many different things, and we'll go over those things later on. But now, let's get into the heart of things. Where did slavery begin? Working backwards. Okay, so we have slavery right now. What happened before that? Well, we got rid of slavery in the United States, and a lot of other countries finally got rid of it just after us, minus Britain, who got rid of us before we did. So Britain got rid of it, we got rid of it, other countries followed suit. Now, go back even further. Where did those slaves come from? Well, they came from Africa. Okay, so those slaves that came over to the New World were from Africa, but there were still slaves in America before African American slaves, right? Or African slaves came over, right? Yes, there were. There were indigenous people who were enslaved by the Spanish and the Portuguese to, quote unquote, help in their farms and such. They were enslaved and forced to work in the farms and the mines and such. Okay, so we're in Africa now. Now that happened during the time of, just after the time of Columbus. Was there still slavery going on before that point? Yes, there was. Don't have anyone ever tell you that there was no slavery before Columbus. No, there was so much slavery. There was more slavery back then than there was afterwards. And I can say that because there was thousands of years of slavery before that all happened. So I'm going to stop going backwards. I'm going to start going forward. Let's go back to ancient Mesopotamia. Ancient Mesopotamia actually had laws that legalized slavery. Slaves were often war captives or debtors. Say someone that, I'll give you an instance. Okay, so in the Bible, it talks about a story where there was a man who owned a few pennies to the king. And the king came to him and the man pleaded, please don't send me to jail. Debtor's jail. Don't send me to jail. And the king said, because of how I want to have empathy with you, because of how you are repentant of this debt, because it's not that big of not a huge debt, I will let you go. You will not be enslaved, and you are free to go. And the man said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then he went out. What did that man do? He went and found someone that was indebted to him. Oh, sorry, no. To the king, he was indebted a lot, a whole bunch of money, and the king still released him. This man went out and went after somebody that owed him only a few pennies and said, you owe me money. And the man said, please, please, please don't send me to jail. And what happened? No, you have to fulfill the law. You're going to jail. Again, for a few pennies. Well, when the king got word of this, he pulled that man back in to talk to him. And he said, what are you doing? And he's like, what are you talking about? And the king said, I know that you have thrown a debtor into prison for owing you only pennies, and yet you owed me so much more. Where is your repentant heart? Where is your empathy towards that person? Oh, so sorry. Please don't throw me in jail. And what did he do? The king said, well, for your actions, I had already forgiven you, but now you will go to jail. Now that was debtor's jail. And this was back during the time of Mesopotamia. And this goes on forever. I mean, this goes into, do you remember in Europe, there was the Irish, there was the Scottish, there were people from England, there were people from France. They all wanted to come to the New World. They wanted to get rid of the religious persecution that was happening in Europe. and decided, well, I want to go to the New World so I can be free. And I said, well, you don't have the money to buy tickets to go there. So in order for you to get there, you have to be sold into servitude. Servitude is a form of slavery, not as we would say the African American population would have gone through. But this is where you would actually go in and you would work off your debt. So say the ship owner, the fee to get you across the ocean is 10 units, whatever currency you want, 10 units. So for every month you work, you get half of a unit. So the ship owner sails across with you and sells your debt to the person that you're going to be serving. And so this person says, well, okay, you owe him $10. You now owe me $12 because there's a $2 fee that comes into that. And the ship owner gave me $2 fee for that. So 12 and 12, every month you get half of a unit. So that is 24 months you have to be in servitude. So you would then serve that person for 24 months. Now, this was a legally binding agreement that was set up by two parties, the ship captain and the person that wanted to go across the ocean. Now, that was legal servitude, not slavery. So there's a little bit of difference. What happened when somebody could not pay their debts in Europe? Well, a lot of times, because they wanted to get rid of the criminals and send them over to the New World, they said, well, you owe me 10 units. I'm going to ship you across. Now you have to pay the 10 units plus the 10 units to get you over there and whatever they tack on afterwards. So you now owe 4 to 5 years. And I think the max was like 5 years you could spend. So the person in Europe sold your debt, so they got money, to somebody else. That person sold it to someone in the New World and they got rid of it. Now that was servitude. In Mesopotamia, that was not the type of that was not the same thing as the slavery in Mesopotamia. What about next? Ancient Egypt. As you know, if you read the scriptures or believe the scriptures or believe the manuscripts that are out there on Egyptian life, the Hebrews or other people were enslaved all throughout Egypt. Egypt was a big hub for slavery, and this was around 3000 BC. Okay, so they're doing agriculture, they're doing construction, they're doing household work, and most of the time these are prisoners of war, people that owe a debt, or someone that the country deemed slaves. So again, you believe the Bible, then you know that the Hebrews were made slaves. They came to Egypt out without being slaves. The Egyptians decided to make them slaves when a new pharaoh came into power. Okay, what about next? And this is more widespread than just these. There's the Persians. There's a lot of different pagan tribes all across Europe. There's people in Asia. They all had a form of slavery. The Greeks had one of the biggest slave trades anywhere outside of Africa. Now, then there was ancient Rome. Now remember, everything I've talked about right now is all before 0 AD. This is well before Africa started really getting into slavery. Now, people were probably taken from Africa, including Egypt, and brought them into the other countries. So let's bring this up. Let's bring you a map of the world. So coming into here, there is no slavery in the New World because this is, again, 0 AD. You come over to this area and you have, before the Romans, you had, let's see, the Middle East, some of the tribes in here had it. Persia, which is now Iran, had it. You had Mesopotamia. You had the Greeks right here. And you had the Romans, all doing slavery, all participating in slavery. Now, Egypt, like I said, is right here. They were part of the slave trade. slave markets. And did they grab some from other places? Yes, they did. But it wasn't as big as it will soon become. Remember also, Israel, the Hebrews were also taken from there and brought into Babylon and then Persia. Oh, sorry, Babylon and then Persia. And this way, they were enslaved to do certain things, and then they were able to return to Israel. Some were enslaved, some made diplomatic residency to some extent. And so that was, again, basically up to, like Rome, up to about 500 AD. And even Greece, about 300. Before zero. So yeah, Rome, about 500 AD. Now, a lot of these other places still believed in slavery and legalized it and admitted it. Okay, so what happened during the medieval times? What is the number one thing we talk about when we talk about medieval times? Well, knights and battles and the Crusades. So what happened? You had people up here in this area of Europe come down to the Byzantine Empire, Italy. So after Rome, the Byzantines were basically taken over. They transitioned into them. And then came down here because over in this area, the Ottoman Empire was taking over. The Ottoman Empire came in and took over Constantinople. Well, as you know right now, it is now called Istanbul. So they came in and started taking over these areas. And what happened to the people that they enslaved, that they imprisoned, that were prisoners of war? Well, they sold them into slavery. And where did they go? Okay, again, this is during the Crusades. So those people then were sent down into all the different markets, whether it is down over into Asia, further in the Middle East, or into Africa. Yes, Africa actually sold white slaves, Crusade slaves, Christian slaves, anybody that was taken during war between the Muslims and the Christians. Now, during this time, it wasn't just the Muslims that were doing slavery. They were just one of the larger groups that were. The Ottoman Empire was all over slavery. The Christians also came in and started taking slaves. Now, they were taking slaves, and again, as we know, Rome was already doing it. Greece was already doing it. But they were taking slaves from the war as well and shipping them up to become slaves in Europe. And they'd be sold into slavery. Well, interesting enough, what happened to both sides? Okay, so the Pope found out, part of the Catholic Church, Pope found out that there was slavery going on. Now, for a little while, they allowed it. For a little while, they tried to talk it down. And then at one point, they said, you know what? No more slavery, enslaving Christians. So if they're Christians, you have to let them go. They were not allowed to be slaves. The Muslims did the same thing. When they capture someone, you become a Muslim or you are sold into the slave market. Okay. So both sides basically did this. They both used slavery and they both basically outlawed slavery of their own faith. So what happened after that? Okay. Then we go into, this is a little bit later, the people of Middle East, the Muslim traders, came in and started to make their way into Africa. And if you do the African studies, ancient Africa history, it's 1 month, but it covers so much. You'll actually learn about how they actually came in through Libya, Algeria, and into the Mali Empire, which was about the west side of Africa. And actually, it wasn't actually the Mali Empire first, it was the Ghana Empire at first. Now, the Ghana Empire was actually they were all based on their own African cultural religion. As the traders came in, the Muslim traders came in order to do work with them more efficiently, you actually had to become Muslim. It helped out with contracts. It was a way of communicating because you spoke Arabic. The laws, you lived under Sharia law. If you were if you were a Muslim. And so a lot of the people of Ghana began to convert in order to work with the traders. And what kind of traders were they? Slave trade, gold trade, salt trade, any commodity that you wanted, they would get. Now, this talks about the slave trade for the Muslim groups. So interesting enough. So this is West Africa. There's a lot of slavery going on. One of the largest slave trades was actually the Mali Empire, which took over after Ghana's decline. But let's go down here. Let's go down here into the Swahili area. So from Somalia all the way down to, I think it was Tanzania, were communities all across the coast. Well, these were called Swahili city-states. They were basically groups that formed all throughout the coast so they could do trading. And they would sail up and down the coast and do their trading. Slavery was not involved until the Muslim traders came down through Africa, through Ethiopia, through Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania, and began to work with traders in that area. What happened? The same thing as West Africa. The traders came in and started to convert the traders in the African markets. Again, Swahili markets. But here's something that's really interesting, really cool. So you have Zimbabwe down here. Zimbabwe, southern Africa, was actually part of there was another society, a city called the Great Zimbabwe. The Great Zimbabwe, even though it worked with the Swahili states, it never allowed, actually, the slave trade. It sold in gold, salt, and so forth. Well, they didn't like that. The traders did not like that. So interesting enough, and I'm not saying this is actual reasoning for it, but what happened around the same time that the Great Zimbabwe was in power? A man by the name of Mansa Musa, who's in the game Historical Conquest, which some of you have in your decks, he's the one that ruled the Mali Empire. So he actually came over in what's called a Hajj, which is the pilgrimage from wherever you live, if you're a Muslim, to Mecca. Now, one of the reasons for doing this is to show your faith. And during that Hajj, you would give out, you'd give to the poor, basically. Well, now this is not 100% because he never wrote it down. But there is a lot of understanding that Mansa Musa, who was the emperor, the Mansa, or king of Mali, had his Hajj and went through the Sahara Desert up into Cairo and through Egypt. And what did he do? When he got there, he brought with him 24,000 pounds of gold, dust, bars, coins, everything. The Mali Empire was the largest and richest empire in the world. Now, Mansa Musa, because he controlled his whole empire, he was king. He was actually the richest man in the whole world throughout history. Now, interesting enough, you think of Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates. Put all of their money combined, it's pittance to what Mansa Musa had. So Mansa Musa comes over to Egypt, gives out all this gold. So what does that do? All of a sudden, the gold trade on the east side of Africa goes haywire. The more gold that's sent in, or more currency that's sent into a community, what happens? The value of gold tanks. It's no longer a rare commodity. Everyone has it. So you would buy a loaf of bread, or like, let's say 100 loaves of bread with 1 bar of gold, or 1 coin of gold. Well, at this point, you had to give a whole bar of gold, or coins, a bag of coins, for a single loaf, because gold was worthless, but that was your type of commodity. So Mansa Musa most likely tanked the market over here on the east side of Africa. So what did that do? Come down to Zimbabwe. The great Zimbabwe at the same time found its decline. Why? Because its largest commodity was not slaves, which everyone else is trading in. They didn't have all the other commodities like everyone else's. The biggest one was gold. The value of gold was worthless. So anyone in Zimbabwe could not trade for things they needed during this time. And the whole civilization, the city basically collapsed. And Zimbabwe was no more. People skirted to all these different places. So why do I bring that up? This is the slave trade. Remember, the slaves that were being traded was a high-priced commodity. Didn't matter what the price of gold was. Your slaves kept their value. So if someone was willing to pay you a ton of gold for that one slave, then you'd sell that slave. Zimbabwe did not sell slaves. So they didn't have many commodities to actually sell. And so when they needed stuff from the traders, they, whatever, we're not charitable. We're not going to give you these things. And so they didn't do that. But here's interesting. So I want to bring up some maps that I have. Oops, not that one. This one. Okay, so this is a heat map during the medieval times. So this is where slavery was. If you look just above India, huge amounts of slavery. In Africa, huge amounts of slavery. Europe, lots of slavery. Middle East, lots of slavery. Okay. This is like a heat map of slavery, the slave trade. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. In Africa, the slave trade, all the major cities would bring their slaves up north, where you could actually travel above the Sahara Desert to get to Cairo. And so traders would trade within this route. Now, what happened in all of a sudden, around the late 1500s to the 16th, late 1500s, mid to late 1500s, African slave trade happened. So anyone that was sending slaves out to be sold in, like, say, Cairo, was now shipping them out here because the Europeans were coming down and gathering the people and going west into the Americas. But this also leaves one more thing out that I wanted to tell you about. So before the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, there was another type of trade. Now, during this time, a lot of the Christian nations were actually trying to get rid of the Muslims and the Jews and the pagans. So if you were one of those, you were told to vamoose or be enslaved, to be not enslaved, to be thrown in jail. Actually, some places it was even executed. So if you were a Muslim, a pagan, or Jewish, you needed to leave. So interesting enough, when the Pope said no more no more Christian slavery, what happened? They used intermediaries. Jewish slave traders, we're not going to say slave traders, Jewish traders would take Christians from captivity, from the debtor's prison, and bring them down to the African market and would sell them there. So there was white slaves being sold in North Africa just around the time of the transatlantic slave trade. But as you know, because the Pope said no buying them if you are Christian, no more buying Christian slaves, the white slaves were basically left on those markets to be sold more in the Middle East or other places in Africa. Or they would, there was missionaries that were sent down from Christians up in Europe to try to buy the Christian slaves and bring them up north. So that's a very interesting part that I wanted to share. So when you say that, oh, the Christians were part of it, the Muslims were part of it, the Jewish were part of it, and the pagans were part of it because they were all trading in this commodity. To them, it was a commodity. Slaves. They were not human, or they were human, but they're still a commodity to these people. Okay. So this being said, I've got two more that I want to show you. So there was a lot of trading between Africa and Europe. African slaves would go up here. The Jewish traders would bring Christian ones down to Africa. Again, they didn't live under the Pope's ruling, so they could bring them down and sell them in Africa and trade them for African slaves and bring those up And it was a nice, clean trade, according to them. Not just according to the Jewish, but the Christians, the Europeans, and Africans, and such. And so there was multiple ways of getting slaves between Africa and Europe through these slave routes. Okay, the next one. This is also very interesting because down here, remember I was talking about the Swahili city-states. These city-states were on this coast and they were shipping slaves from the interior of Africa. So Bushmen and others that they raided and captured, they would send them up north into Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, up into Persia with Iran, all these different places. So they were shipping hundreds of thousands of slaves to these other areas in the Indian Ocean, around the Indian Ocean. So a lot of the Muslim and Middle Eastern countries, they got slaves. India, they got slaves. Pakistan, they got slaves. Everyone got slaves. This even reached, and it doesn't show it here, but into China as well. So slave trade was a substantial thing. And if you can see, the one thing right here, Sudan, it was 1.322 million slaves were sent up just from Sudan into Egypt. That's a lot of slave trade. So I'm not going to be talking about the transatlantic one until later, because we will get to that point. But this was a very important part to let you know of where this all began, how this perpetuated, and how we cannot always see history in our own eyes. A lot of these people, sorry to say, they didn't know it against it. They didn't know how bad slavery was. I mean, you'd think that they could figure it out, but because they grew up with it, because their culture allowed it, it was not wrong to them. And so they did it. If only we could actually show people from our eyes to theirs. But remember, we don't live back then. We cannot judge people for that. What we can do, I mean, we can judge. It's our decision to judge. But we shouldn't judge people like that. Instead, we judge for ourselves. Because our judgment on those people make no effect to them whatsoever. But the judgment that we have on ourselves and how we treat others, that is what we can learn from. If we allow ourselves to be angry at the people from the past, all it does is hurt us. Seriously, that's all it does. If it makes us angry, who's that anger going to affect? Just you. Because it definitely does not affect the people behind you. All those people in the past, they're in the past. It doesn't really have any issue then. But that does actually bring up what's happening right now. So slavery, gone. Servitude of any type in the United States, gone, as far as you know. But there is actually people being enslaved in many different ways. So, what would you do if you saw slavery in Africa or in North America? With your eyes, hopefully you desire to stop them or buy those slaves to free them. So what happens if all of a sudden we see people being enslaved these days? And I'm going to go even broader. What if it's a substance abuse? That's slavery to that substance. What if we're talking about someone being a slave to another person? I sure hope you are to the point where you understand how wrong that is and you find help for that person. So this is why understanding slavery is so important these days. It's because even though we can't make a change to the past, even though we can't get mad at the people from the past because it doesn't do us any good, there's no reason for us to get mad at the people of the past because it cannot help them whatsoever because they're done. It's done. History's done. It can only help us to understand ourselves and we make the changes in our own lives. So if we see a type of slavery, we need to speak out. This is, again, up to you. Where you want to take that, it's up to you. This is just the way I live my life. And this is why I'm speaking out about slavery. Again, making history or teaching you history, but at the same time, teaching you what you can learn from it. Because there are things to learn from slavery and what happened in the past. We learn from slavery so that we never have to repeat it. Okay, That's it. I'm off my soapbox. It's all up to you, however you want to take it. But this is a Adventure Box podcast curriculum lesson. I'm glad that you're able to be here. If you have our curriculum, great. Please subscribe to this podcast and have fun with it. If you are not, please subscribe, have fun with it. If you, in the end, desire to have it, go on our website, www.historicalconquest.com. Buy it. It comes with a full curriculum. It comes with this podcast, which anyone can get right now. But it also comes with expansion packs for the game of Historical Conquest and other activities. So you're not just reading about history, you're actually participating and having fun with the information, playing the game, learning about it in many different ways, including activities. We have coloring pages. We have cross-curricular information. So please subscribe, and we will catch you next time. Take care and have a great day. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.